Ross Pino, you were born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and grew up with alcohol and drug addicted parents. You found stability through skateboarding, where you derived your strong sense of style, fashion, and music. At 20 years old, you found yourself in New York City, where you started a fruitful career as a model and actor. In 2018, you began your journey as an artist and started by painting skulls. Your daughter would paint with you, and her free and creative spirit caused you to combine the childlike nature of what she was doing with your own edginess. As you continued to paint, you allowed your daughter to incorporate her own work and concepts into the majority of your paintings. You describe your art as shining light into the darkness, and anatomy, end of days theories, numerical synchronicities, and emotionally driven poetry are all incorporated into your work. While at times your work is very dark and mysterious, there is a heavy spiritual underlining throughout. Your main objective in life is to set people free from destructive mindsets and be an advocate for mental health awareness through arts and entertainment. Welcome, Ross Pino.
Wow, that was an introduction. Thank you. And yeah, it sounds very well rounded, right? Like you can't have the light without the darkness and vice versa, especially when you're occupying the vessel of a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in a
well
sense,
said.
right?
Well said.
Yeah. Well
Yeah.
said. Man, I'm glad you're here. It kind of just stuck because I found you as an artist. I think on accident. I didn't probably through Brian Brister is my guess because
Gotcha.
I didn't realize you were connected, but I saw your art. I was immediately drawn to it and have been thrilled by it. And I'm also have been trying to connect. I don't know why, but because you and I are from the same home state of New Mexico, I've been trying to seek out artists from that state. And, I mean, there's no other way to say it but to start collecting.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
totally.
really moved by it. So, I think your artist journey is going to be its own cool story as well. And I find your work really compelling.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it all it all happened to kind of find me in a sense, it was never something that I was searching for or looking for, um, if I could say that, like I grew up skateboarding, and skateboarding has, the culture attached to it with art and fashion and music and just all the coolest of the cool stuff, right? So I
Yeah.
was very, very well rounded in what the heck was cool on the streets, before mass culture, really understood, I guess, or was putting that together. Skateboarders were already doing that. And so um, I guess art has always been a part of my life, but never me actually doing it myself. So, but thank you, man. Like I'm
Yeah.
glad that you vibe with it, and I'm hoping that others, vibe with it as well.
Was skateboarding part of what took you to New York?
Yes, actually. So I started skateboarding when I was like 13 years old
Yeah.
and sucked at it. And then I had an experience where I was smoking marijuana with some friends, and I was ditching school and just making a real fool out of myself in like my high school years. I think I was in 10th grade at the time. I got held back twice, so I was probably supposed to be in 12th grade, but that's another part of the story. And I ended up having a really bad trip while I was hanging out with some friends. We were smoking some pretty heavy stuff, I guess, which I thought I was gonna die. I'm like, bam, my whole life kind of flashed before my eyes. I'm like, shit,
Hmm.
I'm gonna go to hell. What kind of person have I become? Like,
Hmm.
if I was to die, I'm definitely going to hell. And the only name that I could think of was Jesus. And I'm like, Jesus, you saved me. I'm gonna see this as a second chance, and I'm gonna change my life. And that's exactly what happened. And I started just really focusing on skateboarding and getting my act together. And
Hmm.
I attributed that all to Christ, and I kind of gave my life to him and centered my life around that aspect of
Hmm.
God and Christ. And um, from there, my skateboarding skills started progressing, and I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, cool. And then I got the opportunity to start traveling with the Christian skateboard ministry, Christ. And essentially, what we would do is we would like go to like Christian uh, music festivals or Christian gatherings or events that, you know, Christians would have, and I would do skateboard demonstrations, and then we would share the gospel afterwards in personal testimony. And during that kind of like 3 years phase of my life, we ended up coming to New York, and I ended up meeting my now wife, but she was, you know, just that all happened because I was traveling skateboarding and came to New York, and then eventually we ended up getting married. I ended up moving out here, and this is what, 12 years ago now, and ended up getting married. And yeah, so it was all thanks to skateboarding why I'm now in New York.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing, you and I spoke at length. We usually talk to someone for 20 or 30 minutes before we do one of these, and you and I think talked for an hour and a half. I was like, damn, we should have just recorded that thing. But there was I took some notes, and I was just looking over them before we started to talk here, and there's a lot about you and your path and the way that you work and navigate life that I really appreciate, and that is very relevant to what Ron and I are doing with this podcast. As primarily centered around you were talking about making new choices in your life and recognizing cycles. And I don't know if you recall that part of our original conversation, but that's a huge, I'd say, value of mine and preoccupation of mine, is how to do that, and how to do that in a lasting way. And you and I talked about that in financial ways and in interpersonal relationship ways, creatively. If we could dive into that, I would love that. I don't know if you have some thoughts, maybe that might
be
sparking.
Totally. Well, when I gave my life to Christ, I saw it as like, you know, like a born again experience. It was that traumatic for me. Like I kind of dove deep into it. And I was 17 years old. Like, what the heck does a 17-year-old? I never really had a girlfriend. Never, didn't have any bills, didn't have responsibility, didn't have any problems in my life. Like, I think I had like a car, and I only had to pay insurance on it and cover my gas, you know, maybe my phone bill, which totaled out to like $80 a month, which is nothing. And so fast forward, you know, coming out of like skate tour and traveling and stuff like that, and complete freedom, into I'm in a relationship, 5 months, long distance. 2 months later, we get married, a total of 7 months of knowing each other, not having any education, not having any skill sets, not having anything, to finding work wherever I can, making minimum wage. And then a couple years later, having my son, and then moving to the city, finding modeling, doing, you know, modeling and acting, and finding my identity in that, and then having my daughter, and all these models and all these, you know, people that I'm hanging around with are all super good looking, and they all want to go out and party and, you know, have a good time. And it was then where I was like, damn, like life is freaking hard. like, and I noticed me like trying to cover up my problems with drinking, with disassociating myself with my family, with running in any sort of direction that I can, whether it be career, whether it be whatever it was. I just wanted freaking a distraction. I did not want to deal with my problems head first, and my problems continued to get worse, and my mental health started to break down. And I didn't recognize it at first, what was going on, but you go through the cycle enough times that this, like, shit, it's like a washing machine. It's like up, down, freaking yo-yo. And I noticed that, like, yeah, life is really not freaking easy. And I need to refigure out my life, because I started noticing the cycles. I would do good, and I would say, yeah, you know what, I just need to stay away from that, or I need to like change this aspect of my life. And then all of a sudden it would be like fucking rock bottom, and then come back up. And then, oh shit, why is this same scenario just keeps on replaying, where like, I find myself drunk doing something stupid that I shouldn't be doing, or getting involved in things that I know I should not be getting myself into, why the heck is this cycle keep replaying itself? And once I actually saw what it was, that it was a cycle and that it was habitual and that it was me joining forces with whatever it was, that I was like, shit, things need to change. And I just need to, because I don't have the strength right now to like battle this, I just have to drop everything. So I kind of stopped drinking for that period of time. My motorcycle was a huge, big part of my identity. And all of them that I kept buying kept breaking because I would just love to like lose myself in the motorcycle, which was completely God, because he was like, bro, like just drop everything. So motorcycles were gone. I wasn't really booking any jobs at the time either, although I had some fittings that I was doing, and I was just kind of focusing on making money and providing for the family. Just pretty much laid down everything, kind of stopped hanging out with friends, kind of, you know, just stopped a lot of things with social media, even like everything just kind of came to a halt. And I'm like, I need to start focusing on some other things, because right now my life is really dark in this period of my life, or anxiety, or I tried it, but like there was thoughts of like, shit, well, fucking things would just be easier if I was dead. Like, because I even saw like the way that I was messing, I was just fucking up everybody else's life. It was not just my life that I was fucking up. I was hurting everybody that was around me. And so I was like, I'm the problem. I need extermination. Like life would be so much better just without me. And after me just saying, you know what, fuck it. Like, you're not having those thoughts, just drop everything, reevaluate life, and don't do anything. And so
hold on 1 second, Ross.
After the first month and a half,
so you were talking about hitting a bottom point and feeling like you wanted to be exterminated.
Yeah. So once I was like kind of like feeling that, and I knew that, like, you know, that wasn't an option. Me, like, just, I guess, those thoughts of me wanting to like end it, it was definitely not an option. And I was just like, you know what, just don't do anything. And a couple months later, after not just not doing anything, just kind of like trying to, you know, like be a family man, doing all that kind of stuff, trying not to get myself in any trouble. I saw my daughter painting and drawing, and I was like really just amazed at the innocence that she had. And I wanted that so bad. I'm like, man, I just want to be a child again. You know, like, life is hard. I messed up so much. Like, I hate myself. Like, how could I become this monster? And I just kind of was like, you know what? Just enjoy this time with your daughter, with your family. And so I was like, yeah, let's you know, paint together. So I went out, got a couple like small canvases from like Michael's or something, and some paints, and we started painting together. And I was like drawing skulls because that's like the only thing that I knew. I was like, growing up with, you know, like skateboarding and rock and roll and heavy metal and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, that's a skull. Like, you ride motorcycles, like that's what you know. So I would like paint these skulls and stuff, and my daughter would be sitting there next to me, and she'd be painting like these hearts and these rainbows and these unicorns. And I'm just like, man, I love the juxtaposition of that, and I love her innocence, and I want to kind of try to take that childlike innocence and nature when it comes to painting and stuff and put it into my work. And so we started painting together, and yeah, the juxtaposition between my darkness and her innocence and that light, I guess, was just very, it did something to me, where it was kind of like telling me a story of, you can have that again, you know, like you can have that innocence back, you could have that childlike nature back. You just have to unlearn a whole bunch of dumb shit that you learned, you know, that was taught to you by social media and the entertainment industry, and even like the past traumas in your life and your family and all that stuff. So yeah, the cycles, they just kept going and going and going, and the only way to break that cycle is to start a new cycle. Like you have to stop doing that cycle, and you have to start a new cycle. So the new cycle that I was starting with my daughter and my painting and this journey was really a kind of like a rebirth again.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess that's a little bit about what I have to say about cycles.
Yeah, that's what the title of this podcast, Cutting for Sign. What you just said would be a pretty much poster child example of that. Doing something that just happened naturally. You're painting, your daughter's painting by you, but then to be able to read that as meaningful or ascribe meaning to it, I think it's a skill. Maybe not everyone. I think that it's a skill that is innate to humans, but maybe not everyone would have the awareness or confidence or creative ability to actually do. And it was one of my favorite parts of your story is that, and I think I even remember kind of when we were talking earlier, that there was one time where she drew on one of your paintings and you were like, yeah, you just kind of screwed my painting up, in your head at least. And then, but then that was one of the steps toward you actually incorporating some of them. It's a great moment.
I remember that, very, very detailed. She definitely was like, I would leave like some of my papers out, and then she would like go over them, and I would find them, and I'd be like, what the heck? I was like, hold on, wait. I actually like print on it.
Yeah. You know what? You're breaking up pretty good again.
I'm breaking up again? Dang, man.
Thanks
3 locations.
Yeah, dude, we're doing it. It's happening.
Yeah. So you were talking about essentially your daughter drawing on your stuff and how her being by you and doing art with you really influenced your work. But also it sounds like it influenced literally how you wanted to be. I have a note from our first conversation that just says like you wanted to become more childlike, and obviously and then some of our other discussion was ways that you are getting your life together that would be way more like adult like, and that juxtaposition and that wholeness of being, of a way to be, being more adult in some ways and more childlike in other ways, is again something that I've just noticed in myself has been very valuable to a lens with which to look at myself, or through which that I would look at myself through, that has been extremely helpful. I would love to hear more about that, if that's something that you like really are incorporating.
Yeah, totally. So growing up, I always like thought that I'm not gonna like put on the shoes that my parents put on, right? And so and especially having like that kind of like experience where I gave my life to Christ, like me getting myself into all this, I guess, sin, or becoming this monster, or this bad guy, essentially, like it didn't sit well with me. Like it broke me so freaking bad, to the point to where I did not know who I was anymore. Like it was like, how the heck could I be this person, and I kind of battled with it, a lot for a really long time, until I kind of read that story in the Bible of the prodigal son, and how the prodigal son returns to the father's house after he kind of like took all of his inheritance and squandered it in a far off land. He wanted just to come back to his father's house and be a slave in his house, but the father welcomed him back. And that story really broke me. It broke me hard, because I was like, hold on, wait, like there's hope for me, like there's hope for a person like me that went from innocent and being, taken care of and good character, and I could come back to the father's house. I can, I guess, redeem myself in a sense. And that gave me hope to hope for the future, and vision for the future, and so that was kind of like my story. I held on to that so dear. I was like, okay, I'm the prodigal son. Like I have not went too far to where I can't come back to God and come back into my innocence, and forgive myself and become that child again. And so with the help of just kind of like, um I would say, yeah, like just me and my daughter, like, painting together and doing those exercises together, and me really just kind of like putting all this stuff that uh was keeping me ego driven and bound to this identity of this bad boy rebel with, um I guess all these desires of my heart that really didn't line up with kind of the person that I wanted to be in life. um they all had to be cut down.
Can you
And
give
some
us an
of them,
example of that? Like what is that? What would that look like on a, a day-to-day basis? Or I mean, is that like you spending money on the motorcycle instead of your kids, or like you going on a bender? Or like what does that kind of look like?
yeah. So I would give up a lot of my nights so I could just go hang out with friends, and go drink and ride my motorcycle and do that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of nights where I wasn't present. There was a lot of nights that I was present, So I thought I had like a balance going.
Mm,
But whenever you're doing things that are just super selfish, like your mind wants to highlight those things and bring them to the forefront because you feel like you're failing in a lot of different ways. And I do believe that I am a good father, a good husband, to a certain extent, but there were certain things in my life that I was just compromising that I did not want to compromise on it anymore. And certain things in my life I had to cut down completely, kind of like the motorcycle, which was then reborn into my life, but at a later time. Or my drinking, that completely had to get cut out of my life, but which was reborn, but not to the point to where it's like, um, it's more self control rather than just a complete removal of
yeah.
something. Um, I do believe in both forms, sobriety, and I do believe in like just self control. Self control is definitely a lot harder, than just removing something from your life. You could
Yeah.
remove something in your life, and you could do it. You can. Me, I always told myself I was going to quit doing something, and I always felt right back in, if not 10 times worse. And so I was like, I just need to learn self control. That's it's the fruit of the spirit, right? So
Mm.
I was just a lot of things in my life, like me just forcing myself to spend more time and be more present with my family, with my kids. And um and then that whole discipline of me reincorporating new things in my life, because I had a lot of free time now, to like do things. I could be on social media, I could be playing video games, I could be in the house, just the same mindset, as I'm like not even present, but like being consumed with something else, such as video games or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
Even painting could, do that. And essentially, if I wasn't kind of doing it with my family while I was, just home time. And so reincorporating things into my life that needed, um that kind of just needed to bring that family bond back together. And that
You know,
was kind
Ross,
of just painting for me and my daughter.
uh, it's interesting that you bring up essentially sobriety and removing things from your life. And I recently I've been looking more at my own life through a lens of recovery lately,
Hmm.
but I don't have an addiction that is like alcohol or narcotics. But I have noticed in life that I have an addiction to certain emotional patterns. And
Oh.
one of my like values, not values, but the ways that I see the world, and one of my sort of personal beliefs is that we're like really ruled by our emotions, and maybe particularly men. Um, and I noticed I was like bullied by my emotions, and my emotions would cause me to say things that I maybe didn't really mean, or I certainly wouldn't say
Hmm.
at that time, or not in that way. And then I started learning some other things, like when you get really emotional and you get in more almost a fight or flight situation, your IQ drops, and you start to see the world through the lens of whatever potential trauma you might be re-experiencing too. Like that's the sort of the further end of it. My point being
Totally.
that I got to a place where I was in a relationship where it was starting to be abusive and threaten the relationship. And I realized, like, oh my God, I had this idea that being in a state of recovery, like, or going into recovery for several years, I was like, would hear people who were in recovery, and I thought, and I could really use that, but I just don't really have anything to recover from. And then as I've learned more, I realized I do. And there's actually programs out there that are about emotional recovery, like anger and things like that. And I recently had an experience where way beyond where I had got to a point of like anger and yelling and verbally abusive, abusiveness that I thought I had was 5-10 years beyond that place. And it reminded me of what you were saying about you reaching a place where you just felt like you needed to be exterminated. Like you're like, I don't have anything to offer this world because I keep doing this thing or being this way. And then my friend, it was actually Ron here, he was like, yeah, that was a relapse, you relapsed. And I had never thought about it in that lens, but I was having a hard time forgiving myself. And this is all very recent, by the way. I'm not talking about something that happened a long time ago. And looking at that experience that I had through a lens of like recovery and addiction, it was like a relapse. And then, Ron was saying relapses happen and they don't mean that, all is lost. And it kind of, not as much the relapse part of it, but kind of what you're talking about reminds me of a lot of what I've been experiencing recently. And I admire that you could do that. And what's interesting is it seems like you're also reaping the rewards and benefits of having experienced that a couple times in your life.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up because, man, I've relapsed in every single area of my life. Not only like I come from a broken home, right? So like I have emotional trauma, I have mental trauma, I have physical trauma, I have all sorts of trauma, and then a whole bunch of trauma that I dumped on myself, just out of my own bad character. And dude, yeah, whenever you're like going through like all of that trauma and these burdens are, weighing super heavy on you and just compacting and compacting and compacting, uh, you don't, it's not a pleasant feeling. You do want to die because it's such a heavy burden for you to carry, and you don't feel like you're going to be, ever seeing the light. You don't, it's, I like to give this analogy. It's kind of like an oyster that gets a little grain of sand within it. That oyster gets irritated, and that irritation over the course of the oyster's life, it starts to, roll that little grain of sand, and eventually years later that little grain of sand becomes a pearl. And that's the irritation in life, that's the tribulation in life, that's the fire, the fiery trials of life that create something beautiful. And it's the over and over, and it's the cycle and cycle, and it's the relapse and relapse. Because every single bad experience, every single bad trip, every single relapse, every single bad thing that ever happened to you in your life, it's a moment where you learn something new about yourself,
right.
where you learn how to either, like you said, fight or flight. You're either going to run away from this problem continuously, or you're going to start doing, you're going to use the brain that God has given us to problem solve. Like us as human beings, the number one thing that we were created to do is to solve problems, to create, to figure out, how to, get from point A to point B, or point A to point Z even, and the people that are very, very good at problem solving, they're the ones that excel in life. And so I had to come to a point in my life where I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. And I understand I can't do this anymore. But if I continue walking in this direction blind, then I am going to continue making the same mistakes that I have been making, because it is habit. I have to just drop everything and give myself a break for a little bit and have new thoughts, and have, see the world from a new lens. And that's kind of why I reinvented myself at such a late age. I was like 30 years old when I reinvented myself. I was doing modeling, I was doing acting, I was making a lot of money. I was, riding my motorcycle. At what cost? My family was deteriorating. My whole, being was deteriorating. And so I was put in a spot where I was like, you know what? I have to reinvent the wheel here. And that's exactly what happened. And I didn't know where I was going. I just knew that I started seeing synchronicities that were kind of like guiding me with like numbers and stuff, that like, you're on the right path, like keep going, kind of cheering me on. And I wasn't doing the same stupid things that I was doing before. I wasn't hanging out with the same stupid people that I was hanging around with before. And to be honest, those people were not even stupid. That we're in the same exact boat. I was a stupid one because I was given the signs over and over again, year after year after year after year after year, like, bro, you probably shouldn't be doing this, but eventually you're going to get caught doing something stupid. And that's kind of what happened to me about like 3 years ago too. Was I was driving drunk. I've driven drunk a couple of times, but this time I was with a friend and we went out drinking, and he was too shit-faced to drive. I ended up getting behind the wheel because I was like, well, I think I could get us home. I ended up getting pulled over in his truck, his work truck. If he would have got pulled over in his work truck, he would have lost his job. He was a civil engineer. Like, a whole bunch of shit could have ended up going really heavily south for him. And so I ended up getting pulled over. I ended up getting a DWI. I ended up getting a lesser charge of a DWAI because it was my first offense on record for anything. But it's a lesson that I had to learn. Like, yo, eventually you're gonna get caught. And whether it's emotionally, whether it's physically, whether it's whatever it is, eventually it's all going to catch up to you and smack you in the face and say, bro, I told you to wake up a long time ago.
Man, can't say it better. I personally
Hard
am
lessons.
experiencing that right now. And it's funny too, because, you can, like, I'm surrounded by a lot of really good people, and I get to have conversations with people like you, and and whenever I want, basically. And I have tons of tools and awareness and, close friends and people who love the hell out of me. And it's like, it still will snowball, like at least the thing that I experienced, which essentially is an emotional complications with my emotions, and those emotions getting triggered at times and causing me to say things that are cruel. Like, that's essentially my bugaboo in life. Like, if I could get that monkey off my back, the sky's the limit, and all the privileges that I have equal doing really good things. And it's just interesting that you can be in these amazing positions in life and have all this help, and then still you're confronted with the thing that got you 10, 15, 20 years ago. It just looked dirtier and worse. I mean, do you have
Exactly?
that?
Oh,
Do you know
yeah,
what I mean?
totally. Yeah. I mean, Ross, I'm in recovery. I've been alcohol free for 7 years, but I'm not a teetotaler. Like, I still dabble in cannabis. I use psychedelics medicinally. But I try to really think of any of it all as like as consciously as possible. But for me, taking alcohol off the table was a non-negotiable for me. And
Totally.
And so, I mean, the relapse thing for me is, I feel like I'm in relapse when I'm emotionally unstable, when I'm like emotionally unsober. And that's when anger's getting the best of me, fear's getting the best of me, anxiety's getting the best of me, thoughts of not wanting to exist is getting the best of me, resentment towards my kids or my wife is getting the best of me. The voices in my head that say I'll never be a success or that I'll never rise above. I come from a family, classic Western deadbeat dad, like it's like ad nauseum, right? Is how often that is like common in Western culture. And I got a letter from the state of New Mexico when I turned 18 saying your dad owes $60,000 in back child support. And if you sign here, you'll get all of it. And if you sign here, we'll forgive him of all that. And I remember forgiving him of that debt, but still carrying this massive fear the rest of my young adulthood that like I am trapped in becoming him. Like I felt like it's almost like, you're a motorcyclist, object fixation. When you're like, if you look at that telephone pole, you're going to hit that freaking telephone pole. And so you're taught to like look through turns and taught to look down the road and all those other things that keep you safe. And I've had to apply that into my adult life. Like I can't keep thinking about my dad. Daniel called me out on the other day. I was using some language around repeating some things to my dad. He's like, dude, grow the fuck up, buddy. You're 41 years old.
It's actually a funny one because his dad was married 8 times, right? And Ron's been married. He was married once and divorced, and now he's on his second marriage, and he's been married for 13 years. And he just goes, I did it, I failed, and I always give him shit. Like, you get to get divorced 6 more times before you fail, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Damn.
Tell me a bit about like what's your relationship like now with your adult parent, like your adult self, with your upbringing and how you view that, and then also like how that affects you as a father now for your son and your daughter.
Man. Well, my daughter's 6, my son is 10. Me growing up with my parents, it was kind of rough, man. Like my mom, she wasn't really there for us all the time. Sometimes we would spend like a lot of time with my grandma, and my dad wasn't really there for us either, because my mom and my dad kind of split up when I was, I don't know, I probably was like 6, 7 when they finally really split up, but they were like on and off like the entirety of me growing up. And my mom and my dad, very heavily, they partied very heavily, and they both were like doing, drugs, cocaine. My dad was like doing crack. I don't know if my mom was, maybe, I don't know, but they were like doing like some hardcore stuff. And they would take me and my brothers to the Mesa with them so they could like go and do their drugs and stuff. And I just remember like sometimes like she would go to parties and like we would have to sleep in the back of the car, and it's really fucked up. Like we kind of like talked about it, all that kind of stuff, before. And she beats herself up over, like not being like the class A parent or anything like that. But I'm like, listen, you did the fucking best that you could with, us and yourself, given like your own traumas and stuff in your life, and the things that you were, trying to do, raising, 3 kids, single pretty much. And you didn't really have an education, and you were just working whatever job that you could find. And so I don't have any resentment towards you. My brother kind of does, or he did for a while. But me and my mom, we have a really good relationship. I call her all the time and tell her how much I love her. And actually, when I got saved at 17, her whole life changed around. She kind of saw the light, and she kind of gave her life to Christ as well. She saw that in me, and it sparked that journey for her. And my dad, we started talking a lot more, probably 5, 6 years ago. But like we always had a close relationship too. But now I could talk to my dad pretty much about anything, because me and my dad are pretty much cut from the same cloth. It's crazy, scary, because he has like had multiple DUIs. Like you kind of nailed it when you were saying the fucking apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Like I'm the same exact way with my dad. And so I tell him all these stories. He's like, yo, dude, you're just like me. Like I'll tell him like, dude, I freaking got way too drunk and I did this stupid thing, and like I'm hating myself right now. He's like, bro, I used to wake up, every single weekend feeling like that and reevaluating my life. And we would have these conversations, and we hit, like a ground that both of us could just relate, and just we could have that relationship, that bonding, that talking together. I try to keep it more on the positive side, because I don't like to get that dark, because I know whenever you just talk about things, over and over and over again, it sets that stage for, I guess, the playing field where you want to go. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start changing my language up a little bit more and start talking more positive. Nice. So I don't, find myself staying in that rut. With my mom, I'm constantly, having conversations with her too. Like, Mom, I fucked up, or Mom, I'm doing good. This is what's happening. So I try to tell both of my parents, the praises and the I guess the negatives that happen throughout my life. It's fucking roller coaster all the time. Like they never know what story they're gonna get. Thankfully, now at this stage of my life, they're getting a lot more of the positives and the more uplifting stories. But there was a time for like 3 years where I was just like, I'm broken. What the fuck? Like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I seriously need to check myself into rehab, but I'm not even an alcoholic. Like, I do this every once in a while. It's like, but even those, you know, little things like that are signs to, you know,
Yeah.
something, you know, that is deeply wrong with you. And so
When you say
for me,
I keep doing this real quick, and you're not even an alcoholic, can you just express one or explain one more time what like this would be?
yeah, so I mean, I guess essentially like I'll call my mom or my dad and be like, Mom, I fucking, you know, I drank way too much, and I'm, you know, I'm regretting, you know, waking up with a hangover, or I drank way too much and I drove and I don't know why I drove, you know. And these are conversations before my DUI. I don't do that shit anymore. Like that, I don't want to mess with that anymore. Um, Way too many close calls, and then that one that really got me, it hurt. Even though I felt like it was kind of like I was kind of like a scapegoat for my friend,
Yeah.
which I felt like even though I lost huge, I still felt kind of like a winner. But yeah, never anybody should freaking be out there doing that kind of stupid stuff. Like you're not coherent, you're not good enough to get behind the wheel. But yeah, like stupid stories like
I
that,
see.
right?
Yeah, I got you.
Where I would like be at like a bar, you know, and like somebody would like, you know, like I remember one time um I was out with some friends and we were buying drinks and stuff, and then all of a sudden everybody kind of belled and I was like already way past my limit, and I'm trying to check out, and um the bill came out to like $400 or something, and I was left with it, and I'm like, what? And like my cards were maxed out, and I'm like, oh frick. And the guys wanted to try to fight me and stuff, and I'm like, oh, you guys don't want a piece of this. And I was gonna get jacked. I was seriously about to get wrecked. And it's just stupid things like that. When you wake up the next morning, you're like, damn, I really did that. You know, like
This
this is stupid.
someone
Why?
re-
For what?
someone recently told me that actually it was a therapist a couple of years ago. Now that I think about it, and they said that alcohol emotionally takes the brakes off, and it takes the brakes off of your mental and your emotional
Mm-hmm.
capacities. And that was like very helpful, because I don't know, maybe thinking about like alcohol flares them up or something. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
just more helpful to hear that it just takes the brakes off. And that's what I've experienced is I'll look back at all of the arguments, you know, or conflict that I've had with partners, you know, my last few partners. And I guarantee that almost every one of them was around me having like even just a drink, you know, it's just,
Dude, that's I mean, that's why I stopped drinking, dude. Every major wreck with my wife, like big blow up, the moments that I would call her things that no man should ever call another person, much less his wife. The
Yep.
moments that I would lose, just completely go apeshit on my kids, especially my son, because my daughter was just a baby then. For
Yep.
7-year-old, when I would be a grown ass man intimidating, screaming at a 7-year-old boy, like every one of those was preceded by some amount of alcohol.
Yep.
And that's for me the time I was like, this just doesn't get to live in my life anymore. And I, you know, I used to drink a lot when I was single and would black out a few times a week. And I had a DUI near miss in England when I lived there for a few years. And, you know, it's like I had close calls and like I would dodge things, and many times of those like wake ups, like Friday, like barely making it to work, hungover, like my boss telling me I look hungover, like all that stuff. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, those weren't good enough signs for me to like really get a handle on it.
Exactly.
And then it was really my family that I was like, there's so much on the line here. Like my kid's gonna
Yep.
freaking hate me when he's grows up, and everybody's got dad issues to begin with, right? Like all things go even. Like everyone's gonna have a rough time with dad stuff. I just thought he doesn't need more, and
Yep.
I'm trying to break the cycle of my own dad issues. So I'm just gonna take them off the table, and you know, I wish I could say it was like a miracle. It kind of was. Like it did gave me some breaks on the emotions, right? It wasn't all gas, no breaks. Now I had some breaks.
yeah.
But then what then I also realized was like I actually was a dyed in the wool asshole who needed to learn the emotional tools on treating people with dignity, on learning to forgive myself, like you mentioned earlier, Ross, on asking my children, my son in particular, to forgive me for losing it over and over and over, learning to ask my wife to forgive me, learning to actually look at myself in the damn mirror with frequency and forgive myself. I grew up in the church too, Ross, and that's my background and went to school for that and all that stuff. But it still made me just the most normal ass, bozo possible. But I had like a kind of a measuring tool against that. But go ahead.
I'm curious, like, we're talking, I know this might be a little bit personal, but like you have kids and family and stuff. Do you like still experience kind of some of the stuff we're talking about a little bit, or how are you around that?
Totally. Yeah, I was actually about to get into that. But Ron, I completely understand where you're coming from, because me and my wife had this conversation multiple times where I had to tell her, some really hard shit, and all of our blowups, and we both came to the conclusion that, well, I came to the conclusion, but she already knew it. She was like that it was alcohol that played the major role in all my major fuck ups in life. Everything that I've ever done that I could look back at and regret or have the thoughts of regret were because there was some sort of alcohol involved in that. And that's a really scary thought. And I thought a lot of times about quitting, and I never actually was successful. Now I could, like, drink socially. And if it, and also too, I've been, you said you dabble in like marijuana and cigarette, psychedelics. For me, I am now on my marijuana or my CBD journey, where I used to have extreme paranoia and like anxiety attacks when I would smoke, because I just had bad trips then. I now exactly know why that was, because I started smoking a little bit to try to like see why I'm so afraid of this thing, or why it's creating fear or anxiety. And it was because it was showing me my problems. And it was like, yo, face them, face your problems. This is what it was laying everything out on the table. It was like, yo, stop doing this, stop doing this. You're doing good at this. Start doing this more. And it was showing me my life. It was like, yo, like, if you just stop doing these things, then you won't be having anxiety whenever you're, partaking with me. And so I'm not trying to get stoned or blazed. Right now I'm using it to just paint a little bit and just to spend more time with my family. And it's really made me more aware, like, yo, you love your family. Every single time I would have a bad trip, I'm like, oh my God, what kind of person am I becoming? Like, I'm a terrible father, I'm a terrible dad. And I always saw my actions, and they were all leading me down like paths of like, just like desert and death and all these things. And I'm like, shit, like, things need to change. And now I smoke, and I'm like, oh, you're doing all these things now. You're taking care of your problems. You're facing your fears head on. And like what you were asking about, like my kids and my family, me and my wife haven't had like the easiest relationship due to me, unfortunately, but she's a freaking saint. All my friends call her Santa Julissa de Queens. Her name is Julie. And the amount of times that she should have left me is stupid. Like, she should have left me a million times. Like, dude, like, I'm not kidding how bad of a husband or a father, or not really much of a father. It was mostly like my husband skills. I was so immature. I didn't know what I was signing myself up for. I had to learn everything. And then whenever problems started coming into my relationship, I started running from them. And I started blaming her for all of my problems. And I started blaming her, and I wanted to run away from my relationship. But because I'm like a Christian or something, like, I'm going to be judged, and like, you can't leave your marriage. So I kind of like stuck it out and just was like pretending like I wasn't married, even though I was married, like, just stupid things. And it wasn't until I actually was like, you know what, like, if you're going to be in this, and if you're going to partake in this relationship, then you have to fucking grow up, dude. You really have a lot of growing up to do, and you have to forgive yourself. And who cares if she forgives you? She'll get over it, or she'll grow with you in this process. But you have to forgive yourself. You have to treat her like she is the number one thing in your life. And that's essentially what I've been practicing, what I've been trying to do. And with my kids, I started incorporating new things in their life. Just trying to spend like more time with them every single day, whether it's an hour or a couple of hours after school, take them to the park, or do some sort of like creative thing with them. My son right now is like addicted to that video game Fortnite. Most kids his age are, which I'll let him do his own thing, but like as long as I get to like just like interact with him and be a part of his life a little bit, then I'm cool. But for the most part, yes, my relationship still has issues, but they're not as bad. And well, my relationship with my wife and my kids never really so much. Though I had to have like a couple of hard conversations with my son because he's of age. He's like 10 years old and he questions certain things, like, do you and mommy really love each other? And I'm like, yes, but love is hard, dude. Like, it's not all butterflies and rainbows. Like, it's like whenever shit hits the fan, you still gonna love that person, So
Yeah.
it's kind of like explaining these things to him, and those are hard, especially whenever he like sees me in like my worst character, and whenever I see certain qualities of him that are negative, that were a direct reflection of myself onto him. Oh, that breaks my heart, dude, because it's like, dude, like, I'm sorry, you should have never saw that side of me, man. Never. I should have been like grown up more. So it does break my heart.
It's wild how kids are these like reflectors and magnifiers of who we are, and they really do carry on like all the parts of us that we would hope that don't get to carried on, but they do. And that's, I mean, my own experience, that the fastest way I've found through that is to acknowledge my own fuck ups with my kids. Like, look at them in the eye, tell them I'm sorry, tell them what I did was wrong, like, just to name it.
Exactly.
And also as an adult, like as I've gotten older, is to give my kids permission. And I don't know if this is like, this is my way, I'm not suggesting this to anybody, but to give my kids permission to tell me when I'm redlining. Like if I'm like taking things too seriously and I'm starting to redline about the kitchen being dirty or rooms being dirty or leaving trash in the car or whatever my stupid little hot buttons are, for them to give me permission to like interrupt. And
I like that.
Yeah, my daughter, she's 8 and she's 8 or 9 now. 9. Sorry.
Do you know her name?
Yeah, her name is Emma. Emmanuel. So she's the best. She's the bravest person in our family. And she's really good about seeing it happen and starting to thoughtfully interrupt. Like she'll say something really funny and disarming, like, Dad, your eyebrows look great today. And it's just like,
that's her way to,
I can't be mad at that kind of comment. It's so good. Funny. It's really
the last couple of relationships I've been in, we actually have conversational safe words.
You need them, man. You need them. Like, you need something to like hit, it's like the button at the gas station.
Yeah.
When like you need that, like kind of like throw the brake on when things feel out of control and you feel it back into your car sliding out. Like, you got to have something, some kind of tool.
Yeah.
So right now, Ross, like, what's motivating you when you're painting? Like, what's coming up for you in your spirit life and you've talked a lot about your Christian background. I've got my own crazy journey that's like taken me into Catholicism now and out of other things, and it's deconstructed, reconstructed, all kinds of weird stuff. And one thing that's kind of drew me to your art was like, there's definitely spiritual influences in there that I find. Also, before I forget it, I do want to point this out. I love that you use the oyster and the pearl as a metaphor for our life. And I wanted to remind you in particular and myself that the symbol of the pearl is so profound as the gate into heaven, the gate into the afterlife, because it's like the pearly gates, right? Like, you've heard that phrase. Well, in the book of Revelation, the Revelation of John, it's actually a giant pearl. It's not like a gate made of pearl. It's like a giant pearl that you walk through into paradise. And I think that's significant, that like the threshold is all the things that we've gone through, is like the collective pain of that cycle that you said. I'm so glad you talked about that, because it is what creates that pearl is resistance and irritation, over time and creating boundaries around it. That's what a pearl is, a boundary around the irritation. That's beautiful.
Exactly.
So, but I wanted to get into some of the symbology and some of the things that you're like are finding like really moving for you in your art. Like what's like standing out to you? What's like pushing you in that world right now?
Yeah. So in my work, when I first started, obviously it was like just the skulls and stuff, right? And then I started to develop a voice because I guess of my upbringing with the Bible and Christianity and spirituality, and me even going through my own spiritual correctness uh, with just not really a fallout of Western Christianity, but me finding my own path through the
Yeah.
kingdom of heaven, because
Yeah.
the Bible says the kingdom of heaven is found within,
That's right.
and it is no longer I that increase, but He that increases. And essentially, what that is it's like your highest self, the
Mm-hmm.
Christ within you that elevates your thinking. You're gonna either descend into the gates of hell or the pits of hell
Mm-hmm.
that are within this realm as well. Could it be an actual place? Maybe, but you could also ascend into a kingdom of heaven mindset where you're manifesting things that are of the kingdom of heaven: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, things of these
Yeah.
manner.
Yeah.
And so when I started, I guess, developing a voice, I wanted to talk about spiritual things.
Mm.
And I think it was because not necessarily because I want to talk about those things, but because that was kind of what I was all wrapped up in. And it was a way of, I guess, God, uh it was a way that God was talking to me through
Mm-hmm.
these symbols, through my artwork, through me painting. The whole therapy was not just me painting, like that's therapeutic, but it was like the thinking, the why is this, and why was I doing what I was doing, the psychology behind all of it,
Mm.
the the polarity of life and death, good and evil, um, right and wrong, the good, the bad, the angel on one shoulder, the demon on the other,
Yeah.
the reptilian brain, and also there's a couple different parts of the brain, right? Like there's a carnal mind that we all have. There's also a mind that wants to be creative and free flowing, and that wants to set us free. And so I wanted to talk about all these kinds of things, but I wanted to do it from the lens of like the monster, me, the
Mm.
death aspect of life, and like
Mm.
how you go from point A to point B, or the reverse, how you go from life to death, or how you go from death to life.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of paint that picture in my work, and also incorporate like the synchronicities, the numbers, the numerology that I was seeing at the time as well. When I
Mm.
first started painting, I started seeing the number 1111
Mm.
everywhere. And I'm like, this is dumb. Like, and it just kept happening and happening and happening, to where it was not coincidence anymore. It was a coincidence. It was purposely done
Mm.
to wake me up. It was what I found after meditating on that for a little bit of time. A couple months later, it was a sign for me to wake up, to be more alert, to keep my eyes, focused.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and I started incorporating these numbers into my work, because they had a lot of meaning to the things that I was painting, the things that I was like talking about within that. And so 1111 is just symbol for people. Whenever they look at my paintings, I want them to wake up as well.
Mm.
My first show was called Wake the Sleepers. My second show was called Breathe in Pneuma, and Pneuma is
Mm.
Greek for
Yep.
spirit.
That's right.
And my third show was called Into the Light, and I'm going to be doing another solo show here May 20th, which is in a week or two. And this one is going to be called Escape the Cube. And I put a lot of like symbols within my work that have to do with like the cube, and like little skeletons inside of a cube that are holding a match.
Mm.
And it's the cube resembles a prism, or the prison in the mind. Um, a box that you could put yourself in, a box that you could put God in, of, I'm gonna be stuck in this prison in my mind, in this way of thinking, this lower realm of thinking, or I could open up the box and I could see the world completely differently. And so this whole show is called Escape the Cube, because we do have prisons that we have to escape, personal prisons, prisons that are imprisoning all of us as a culture or a world. You know, like there's so many different prisons that we're being locked into. And the funny thing is that whenever you unfold a cube, you get a cross. And it's so symbolic for, you know, Christ came
Interesting.
to set the captives free. You know, Christ came to do away with sin and to give access to people to the kingdom of heaven. And so my whole, I guess you could call it a ministry, but my whole purpose or reason for painting is to wake people up, is to set people free from the captivities of their mind, the mental, the negative mental aspects that they could like carry on, and show people that whether you're good, whether you're evil, whether you're doing right, whether you're doing wrong, there is still you're the master of your sea. You're the one that's captaining your ship. A lot of people, they're waiting for Jesus Christ to come back, but he's already here. He's living within all of us. He's waiting for you to unlock him.
I thought about that particular idea when you talked about unfolding the box and becoming a cross, because that's also something we're called to do as people of faith in Christ, is to take up our own cross and really allow suffering, like all these things, these mistakes, these relapses, these like unknowing of what to do next, to like embrace those and go, this is actually a call. This is a time for me to heed the call, to allow, to notice the symbols, to notice the signs, and go like, help is around me. I can lean on this and begin to experience transformation in this. That's really cool, man. That's super cool.
Yeah. So I definitely, that's kind of my mission in the work that I do. And I want people to see things, you know, through a different lens than the lens that, you know, they've been looking through their entire lives, you know. And another thing is that I want people to understand that they don't have to be afraid to reinvent themselves, but to chase that calling that God has put within them. And sometimes you don't even know what the heck it is. This all kind of fell into my lap, and this might only be like a momentary, you know, like journey with art. As much as I love it, you know, like I'm not going to put God in a box and like say like, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, and you have to do it this way. No, I'm just enjoying the ride right now. And to be honest, sometimes God will take you through like the darkness in order to show you something, to teach you a lesson. And not necessarily he will do it to you, but like he'll allow you to go ahead and, you know, create whatever it is that you want to create, right? And there's consequences for our actions. The Bible says in, what is it, it's Proverbs 18:21, I believe, that says life and death are found within the tongue. Those who love it will eat the fruit thereof. We have the ability to create life and to speak life into people's hearts, or we have the ability to speak death and create death into people's lives. And the same exact thing with us. There's this old ancient like Japanese proverb that says, be careful what you say about yourself, because the warrior inside does not know the difference. You know, he doesn't know, you know, the difference between what you're saying is if you're joking or not. And so I like to see that the same exact way, because the entire time that I was going through hell on earth and, you know, revisiting all these different things that I didn't want to revisit, is because I had a certain language and a certain way that I was talking to myself. I was always using language like, you're never going to be good enough, you're always going to continue doing this, you're going to be stuck here forever, you're going to and dude, it wasn't until like I was like, bro, you're keeping yourself here, that I was able to change up my language and be like, you know what, I'm going to be this kind of person, I'm going to be successful, I am going, and no matter how much, you know, life kept showing me that the opposite was true, it was like I kept planting these little seeds into the ground. And every single time I planted these seeds and I would water these seeds, little by little, that little, you know, seed turned into a little plant, into a little tree. And now I'm starting to see fruit from it. Why? Because I didn't give up on myself. I didn't stop talking positively about myself. I did not choose the darkness, but I kept choosing the light over and over again. And did I choose darkness along the path? Yes, I did. And I'm ashamed of it, because but we're human, right? And I don't,
Yeah.
I don't want to choose the darkness anymore. That's the part about, like, you know, I guess, um, recovery is that
Right.
you want to have way more victories than you do defeats.
Totally.
Yeah, you're speaking to something in a way that Ron and I were talking about this earlier today. To me, when you're talking about the world kept showing you something different, even though you were saying the things, the way that I have articulated that is that I have my subconscious, or we have our subconscious, and then we have our conscious mind, which is a lot smaller and has a lot less influence. And so one thing that I've been interested in is, well, if I'm dominated and guided, and the creative force in my life is mostly my subconscious, how do I change my life, you know, with my little conscious mind? And
Mm-hmm.
I've come up with a few answers to that. And one of those answers, traumatic experiences can change you pretty dramatically. That can change your subconscious, but also just repetition, mindful,
That's right.
small repetition over a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
that's become, I mean, it's exactly what you just said. And then I just got back from Hawaii, and I was staying with a friend of mine, who's this older lady who doesn't overthink things too much. She's intelligent, but she just doesn't overthink things too much. And she just goes, fake it till you make it. And I've always loathed
So
that
true.
statement, but it's also exactly what I'm talking about right here. And I finally
Mm-hmm.
linked to those things.
Mm.
So I've
Yep.
kind of given myself permission recently to go, just put it on and say it. And over time, and with the intention of, I'm not just faking it, with the intention of meaning it and getting there little by little. It sounds like exactly what you did.
Yeah, dude. It's so dope that you kind of made that connection, because I see analogies like that all the time where it's a synchronicity. That's really what it is. It's the universe or the world or God, like, just showing you that there is meaning, and reaffirming you and confirming everything like the path that you're on, so that you don't give up, that you just keep going,
That's right.
keep pushing,
Yeah.
keep trekking on. And I liked what you said too about kind of like a traumatic experience, because um I think it was like right after we had that conversation, I was like out hanging out with some friends, and we were drinking a couple of beers, and we went to a barbecue, and it was like four of us, and I was like, you know what, dude, like, mind if I spend the night at your house? Like, I don't want to be driving my motorcycle back. You know, like, I had a couple of beers, like. And he was like, yeah, sure. And the party, we had a couple more beers, and like he brought out some acid, and he was like, yo, everybody wanted acid? And I'm like, oh, dude, I smoked weed before. Like, I get anxiety. I've had bad trips. Nah, I'm good. And he just kept like kind of nudging and like peer pressuring, in a sense. And he was just like, dude, it's gonna open up your mind. It'll take your art to new levels. And I'm just like, he showed me what it was. It was like this little thing like this, and I'm like, oh, what is that gonna do? Like, I was like, whatever, fine. Not even thinking straight. I had a couple of drinks, and this is kind of like, it goes back into like this, the doing things that you probably would never do whenever you're like had a couple
Yeah.
many too many drinks. And man, I was in for a ride, dude. That trip, it started out good, and then all of a sudden it took a turn for the worse, and I wanted to go home, and my wife was in Massachusetts at the time at a birthday party for her cousin, and I should have been there, but I ended up taking off the weekend to like paint and ride my motorcycle. And I'm like, oh shit, this is all coming back full circle again. This is sucks. And I'm like, I thought I was gonna die. I was like, oh my god, this trip is never gonna end. And I gave up my family to go be selfish with, you know, my motorcycle, and I'm here taking acid, and I'm gonna die on this street corner, and I can't even find my Uber. Um, Long story short is, like, I was projecting a whole bunch of things on my
Yeah,
friends that were
totally.
really, really deep within me. And I ended up making it home, and like the trip ended up like being over, and I was traumatized. But what it did is it set a whole bunch of things into perspective to me, for me. I, uh, I believe that psychedelics can be like a part of healing and stuff. And I was doing a lot more research after it. But as bad as the trip was, it was actually really good for me, because it
Yeah.
really set a whole bunch of things into perspective. Like, yo, you've been doing good as a human, as a husband, as a father, as all these things, but you're still dropping the ball a little bit. Like, it's time to pick up, you know,
Yeah.
a little bit more weight, and to correct course a little bit more. And it was very traumatic. And I think that I wouldn't have been able to see things a lot, as clear in a sober mind with all the distractions around me if it wasn't for the psychedelic to kind of just like, bah! Grab me by the freaking, nose and pull me to where I needed to go, essentially. But yeah, I started doing a lot more research into psychedelics, magic mushrooms, really low doses. And what they're finding is that it's helping people to break addictions, to beat depression, to beat anxiety, to really lift their spirits, and to set them free of a lot of like past traumas and a whole bunch of other things. So um, I'm not like 100% for it right now for me, but I do know that there's a lot of benefits that can be had for it. So I'm keeping an open mind to it right now. I'm just kind of like chilling, having like a few drags of, like the medicinal marijuana. I ended up getting my card, seeing where that takes me, but it's just like anything, right? If you overdo it, it could be abusive. And so I'm not trying to overdo it with this whole thing. I'm trying to just let it, like show me the things that it needs to show me, and to, bring forth healing. Not that I'm looking for it to do those kinds of things, because ultimately I'm the one that has to be doing those. But it's showing me stuff in my times that I'm high. It's showing me things that I need to fix in my sober life, to incorporate in my sober life. And it's super cool knowing that I am trying to be the best person that I could possibly be. And I'm not taking life so seriously, and I'm not beating myself up so much, over my past mistakes and my past traumas, but I'm actually kind of living, and I'm like in the moment with my family. I'm in the moment with my painting. I'm in the moment with all these things. And the world could end tomorrow. I could die tomorrow. All these things like that, like people are scared of, that I'm scared of.
It's
But
interesting. Oh, sorry.
But go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
But the cool thing is that I don't have to be in that mindset.
Yeah.
I'm kind of free from it, and it's awesome.
Yeah, that's so cool.
What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, since you were talking about not being a teetotaler, I wanted to share an experience Ron and I had recently. And he called up one time recently and just sounded really good and really present. And I was like, I wonder if he's got some marijuana in him. And I didn't know where you were with marijuana, because I know you've worked, massaged that relationship. And I finally asked him at the end of the conversation. He said that he had, and that spawned us to talk about how marijuana, can be such a positive influence in people's lives, right? And it was really interesting to hear. And then since then, like I've like experienced you a couple of times, and I don't really know your inner workings of your relationship where you're at with marijuana right now, but it certainly seems to be like a positive thing that you're doing. And what you just said with being present with your painting and with your family and stuff, it's like that's exactly what I experienced with my friend here. It was a completely positive thing. Like, he didn't sound out of it. It didn't sound fake. There was continuity between him experiencing it and then the next day, like there was a little bit, no marijuana in him, and we were continuing a conversation. The continued conversation had a little bit of the feel of the day before. It just seems to be really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting deal. I mean, I don't want to like put labels on myself, but I kind of keep everything, I don't want to recreational jump into any of it. I'm not trying to get blasted on anything.
Exactly.
But it's been helpful. It's been super helpful. Like, really, I think the interesting thing about it is like the breaks remain with marijuana, like the emotional breaks. And actually it's almost like the emotionally vulnerable, at least in my mind, I actually want to become more like attached emotionally and spiritually to myself. And so it feels like my roots kind of go deeper in that world. It's a little hard to explain, but
that's what it seemed like, though.
Yeah,
it seemed like that's a good visual. It seemed rooted. Like really rooted in both thought and presence and emotion. And it was.
And what's interesting about that, though, is like you can cross a threshold and then you're none of those things. Right. And so it's really like you kind of, it's, you mentioned psychedelics earlier in microdosing, things like that. I think that's kind of like the secret to any of it, right? Like, you know, I'm not the kind of guy that thinks that people should stop drinking or anything like that, but there is really a lot of value in having limits to yourself and limits to what you're taking in and limits to what you're doing. And just like we wouldn't have somebody who's preparing to run, like they're just learning to run, we wouldn't make them go run a marathon. We wouldn't make them go do 10 miles. Like, you know, hey,
Exactly.
today's a mile, and you're actually going to do a mile for a while. And it's, and it's, there's not a lot of benefit into like beasting yourself every single time so that you can't recover. I know that metaphor doesn't totally work with drugs and alcohol, but you know, there's a word. What is that word that I'm looking for? Not limits,
Tolerance.
but tolerance, something like that. Something that moderation. Moderation is the word I'm looking for.
Moderation.
Yeah. I'm actually leading a group of men on a psychedelic journey at the end of the summer. Specifically,
yeah. What are you guys going to be doing? Mushrooms?
Yeah. We'll be
nice.
Doing mushrooms and holding space for guys dosing for over 2 days.
What dosage?
It depends on their weight. So the first day is going to be a light dose, and it's going to be a time for them to just feel the effects of it. A lot of these guys have never done it before in their life. And then the next day we'll do a heavier dose, but not like what would be considered a hero's dose, but a large dose.
So it's like a group of men that are looking to, I guess, like solve problems.
Yeah, a lot of those things that you brought
figure
up,
figure out like a lot about themselves, you know. Regained some sort of a ground in their life, figure out, you know, what the heck is making them tick a certain way.
Yeah, the thing with psychedelics and mushrooms in particular is it brings you what you need. And whether you want to you're like, I want to think about my mom issues today, or I want to think about my dad issues. And it's like, it's not what's going to serve you. It might, but it's going to serve some other things up. And kind of like you had with acid, like it's showing you some things in your life, and it'll do that. It's kind of amazing.
I never done mushrooms before, actually. I did acid that one time, but like I used to smoke recreationally weed when I was a kid, just for fun with all my buddies and stuff. And I kind of was joking with my wife. I was like, isn't it funny how like God, or I kind of put the two and two together, like the comparisons. I'm like, when I was 17, God kind of like saved my life and changed the course of my life through a terrible experience smoking weed. I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if like he kind of like saved my life again through the partaking of more weed, but actually like doing it for the right reasons this time? I was like, listen, whenever I'm like smoking a little bit, just have like a little hit, I could get in deep conversation with my wife, and this is not typical for me. Like, I want to spend more time with her. I want to like communicate with her. I want to be present with her. I want to be present with my kids. I want to do those things, and I'm starting to notice that I want to do them even more when I'm sober. And off of the drug. So it correlates. It relays into my sober life, and I'm like, all these experiences that I'm like learning, and what my psyche, what I guess my higher self is showing me, God, if you want to call it that, is it's showing me this version of myself that I want to be, that I'm just too scared to, I guess, admit, or whatever it is. And then I do that, and then it kind of like relays into my sober life. And so it's kind of like a little wave that I ride.
That's cool.
But I also wanted to bring up something about alcohol whenever you're mentioning it, you know, earlier, is that I do know that alcohol, you know, it's a depressant, right? And whenever you drink, you get intoxicated, right? What's the opposite of intoxication? Well, it's detoxifying your body. It's a poison. You're putting a poison into your body. You're putting a depressant into your body. And I was just kind of making like this association, you know, with it, that, man, it's one of those tricky little bastards that like you be riding that wave for so long and you don't even know why you're doing it. And now that like I'm like smoking weed, it's kind of funny because they call it, you know, like getting high or getting lifted, getting elevated, whatever it is. And I totally see the correlation between those two substances. And me smoking weed right now, I don't even want to drink as much as I used to. I'll have like a drink or two, but like I'd much rather just like take like a little puff, and I don't need to have a drink. It's like okay, like that's good enough for me. Like I'm getting like that fix that I need, but I'm also like working on problems in
Yeah.
my head, problem
Yeah.
solving solidly. But I just kind of wanted to like toss that in there because, you know, the two of those, you know, I know them very well. More so the alcohol, but I'm kind of really glad that that chapter is slowing down in my life.
Yeah.
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 Hey, Ross, before this conversation winds down, I think we're pretty close to the
Yeah.
time. I wanted to thank you for something because watching your, and I kind of voiced this to you the first time we talked, or I messaged it to you or something, but the way that your art is really inspiring to me, both in its the style that you're working in, the subject matter, and then also, quick question: how long does it take you to do one of your paintings generally?
Um, well, the process could be anywhere from like 5 to 20 hours
Yeah,
per
so
piece.
that's what it looks like to me, and I personally spend way too much time on my paintings. And I say too much time because there I generally paint some sort of sunset and skyscaper and nebula or galaxy. And it's really fun and interesting, and things are coming out. I'm proud of what they are. However, it just takes too much time, and
Mm,
it's not representative of my psyche. It's more like something that is just really, well, I don't really know what I'm saying there. I'll have to work that one out. But my point is that I would really like to have something in my life that was more episodic and more quick. Like I could do it faster and then do another one,
mm.
less of my mind and more of just the impulse. And that's
Yeah, the
why I
heart.
love, yeah, I love your story with your daughter and all that, just the joy of it. And so, but I have like my own sort of commissions lined up, and I just can't get out of the style that I'm in right now. I just have to do it
Mm,
until I'm done with the jobs that I have to do, and that's going to be kind of a while. And so I was talking with someone recently, telling them that I need this aspect of my life. I need to do something more repetitive and more quickly repetitive, and something that's less hyper crafting, and controlling and detail oriented. And Ron and I are both writers, and we are both in a writing group because we're both working on a book right now. And what happened out of this is because I kept thinking about you. It just hit me at the right time. It was one of those signs you cut, just the look of your art. I was born down in Mexico. You have like a Day of the Dead feel, to me at least. I know
mm-hmm.
that's probably not your intention, but that's the way it hits me. And so it just kept coming to my mind. And then we had a really nice talk that one time. And long story short, I was speaking to this one person about writing, and I realized that every little part of a scene that I write, like the scene within a chapter, maybe there's 5 to 10 of them, those take about 4 or 5 hours to do after all is said and done. And the playfulness in them, the way I do it, can be very much like what's
Mm.
inspiring me. And I realized, oh, I don't have to do it through painting right now. I actually have an incredible
Mm,
opportunity to do it through writing.
Yeah.
I just
nice.
thank you for that. You played a little part in that realization.
Yeah, I mean that's super awesome, right? Like I'm writing. I have a few children's books that I'm trying to get off the ground, and one of them in particular is a completely different style of what I was doing with, I guess, my traditional art on canvas. I kind of have like the leather jackets that I do as well that kind of take on their own little animal, only because they're a leather
Mm.
jacket. But yeah, I mean, I would just say, if it makes you happy, do it. It doesn't matter how long it takes you because there's certain things that I do that I'm super meticulous with in certain paintings, and they could take me a really long time.
Mhm.
But that's not always the goal. That's not always the
Right,
objective.
right.
Sometimes I get an idea that's like super simple. Like I remember when I came up with like a signature that I have right now, which is um, a skull on a yellow background with a black dash and a happy, like it's a smiley face over a skull. And to me, what that symbolizes, and it's super easy to do, and I've never seen anybody do it before, which is why I call it my signature, is because it's the juxtaposition of both those worlds, like the
Mm.
good and the evil, the you know, the trying to fake it till you make it, right? Like putting on that mask, and you know, doesn't matter how much bullshit is going on in your life, you put on a smile, you're going to change the course of your entire day. You will. Whenever you smile at somebody or say hi to somebody, you change the course. You change the whole language, bro. And it doesn't matter how much you think of like an asshole you are, or you're this or you're that. That might be true, but it all changes whenever you put a smile on. So
That's
just
right, man.
do it, man. However long it takes you to do it, do it.
I love it. I love it. That's super good. That's good. Ross, thank you so much for joining us, dude. Where can people find you? How can they find your art and follow you and all that stuff?
Yeah, so right now, it's mainly my Instagram, which is at Ross Pino 88, or you could go on my website, which is rosspino.com. Yeah, that's kind of all I really follow up with.
Cool.
I try not to have like so many different avenues, you know, I try to
Yeah.
keep it simple. And Instagram is one of the best places to go, you know, for
Cool.
business or whatever, to build yourself up.
Nice, man. Dude, you're the real
Thank
deal,
you.
dude. I appreciate your story. I
Yeah.
really appreciate your vulnerability. Like we men, I mean, all people need to hear this, but men in particular, we learn to be men from the story, the power of other men, and hearing and sharing each other's stories. So, dude, you didn't hold back. You gave us the real dirt, and that's powerful to me personally. And I know someone else will be affected that positively. I appreciate that, dude. Thank you a lot.
Well, I agree, man, you know, and thank you for letting me have this opportunity. And I told myself a long time ago that um that if I was ever given the opportunity to do something like this, I'm not gonna hold back, you know. Um
Nice.
I might not go into like heavy detail, but I'm not gonna hold back about like some of the
Yeah.
things that, you know, went on in my life. And because the way that I learned to I guess deal with my own stuff was basically what you just said, is like hearing other people's hash out their own
Yeah.
problems and talk about it on podcasts or YouTube or whatever. Every single time that I'm having an anxiety attack or doing some stupid shit, go to YouTube right away. It's like, okay, somebody else is dealing with, oh, I'm not the first one. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. That's
cool.
right.
Now I have somebody to hear their perspective. But yeah, thank you guys so much for
Yeah.
having me. And if you're gonna do that mushroom trip, let me know what the details all are and the dates. I would love to try to come check it out. It sounds like
Right
a
on, man.
pretty awesome time.
Yeah, it'd be good to have some face-to-face time with you, dude. Walk
Heck
with you
yeah.
through that. All right. Take care.
Appreciate you, my
Yeah.
friend.
All
Adios,
right,
buddy.
guys.
See you
Take
later.
it easy. Bye.
Bye. Cool. So this live Instagram is also our field dressing. We just finished a podcast episode with Ross Pino, New York-based, Queens-based artist and painter, general badass, cool guy who's really, I think the most badass thing about him is his vulnerability that he's leading out in around his life, his struggles with his past, with his family of origin, parents drug and alcohol addicts, his own journey through that, his struggles with that, his own journey into finding a lot of like ego trappings through success that he had through acting and modeling. He was an insanely good looking guy. and then his journey into like finding his real self, and in him using art as a way to talk about that transformation.
Yeah, and just that his statement of purpose is to help people with mental health issues through art. You know, like I think that is, I'm hearing that more and more. It's not as much, maybe there's a new paradigm occurring, which is it's not as much about becoming an incredible artist, talent, skill, production wise, but what you're doing with that. And that so many people seem to be valuing mental health through whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
It just warms my heart. And a guy like that with his past, and you know, he's got decades ahead of him, and his art, yeah, I loved everything about it.
It was really good. I think what is powerful about him advocating for mental health through his medium in particular is it's an invitation for us all to find our bliss, like Joseph Campbell would say, follow our bliss, find our bliss, because it's that thing that feels detached from us and we don't feel worthy of it, whether it's art or music or being with our kids. It doesn't really matter what it is. But it really is a pathway into wholeness.
Well, and that's the thing about him, you know, we didn't get into the actual details of his situation, of his transition from being a successful actor and model
Yeah.
into art, but he literally was having, as I understand it, having some sort of issue with this is not fulfilling. I'm kind of becoming an asshole.
Yeah.
I think he used the word. I don't know if he used the word asshole. Sorry, Ross. But I trust that he knows what I mean.
Yeah.
And then by hook or by crook, he just ended up sitting down with his daughter and painting, like just as a fun thing to do with his daughter. But he said that the first time he picked that paint can up, that he didn't want to put it down, and so he's sitting there painting. His daughter's painting. He only knows how to paint skulls, so he's drawing and painting skulls, and she's doing rainbows and unicorns. And then she at some point in time like starts drawing them on his thing, and then he said that it was like, you kind of, in his head, you kind of just like ruined my thing. But then he's like smart, and he cut his sign, you know, and he saw that the juxtaposition between the darkness that he was putting down and the lightness that his child was, and it's literally him in a dark place and the lightness of his child manifesting and getting focused on the same piece of paper, you know, that he recognized that that's what was happening from the higher perspective. Was like that type of skill to be able to see when life is kind of, you know, it's giving you the thing that you want, is I think one of the most valuable skills out there. And then what happens, that turns into a more lucrative career as he puts his like adult mind on top of it, hones it, adds production to it, and now he's a different person.
Totally. And he's embraced the juxtaposition. He's embraced the light and the dark together. He's holding them together closely, celebrating them both. Like, you know, Rainier Wild would say, or one of our past guests who talked about the shadow, like he's really embracing the shadow part of himself and the shadow part of the human experience. Ross is.
Yeah. And
in his art. No, and I think that's why it's being celebrated, being collected. I mean, he's got collectors. Guys are really like going after his stuff because it speaks to that part of us. They're like, oh, I'm both of these things. I'm all of these things. And until we can admit that to ourselves, until we can really own that part of ourselves, that I am both dark, I am both light, and not be afraid of those two things, or not be afraid of the darkness in particular, like we're always going to feel that kind of discontent, the disconnection in our life. And I think that's why people love his work so much.
Yeah. And it's, you know, for people out there like who are wanting that, because it's easy to say, right?
Yeah.
But how do you do that? And to do that through an art, you know, it's like you kind of have to have, you don't have to have a skill level. I don't believe that, but you certainly have to sit down and do it and be free enough somehow with your mind through whatever skill level you have, even if it's very small, to get something that is outside of yourself, whether it's you're doing music or writing or art or painting or drawing. It can be intimidating, and I am intimidated by it. Like it can be intimidating to be honest, and get that pipe kind of open and the rust off and flowing. And I have a friend of mine who I saw is perfect example of this. He'd never drawn a thing in his life, but he's very open with who he is, you know, and he's a musician, right? But he picked up a pencil one time and started drawing. He just decided to do a little comic a day. He's terrible technical drawing, but his stuff is genius. It's honest. It's him put on the page. It's through a skill level that's very low, but then because it's so honest, that also has its own charm, almost like Gary Larson's Far Side things. It's a little bit like that. And I just think that, you know, what Ross is inspiring me to do is I have a totally different painting style. It's really realistic and it's driving me nuts. You know, I just want to do more like what he does. I just want to be able to create something in 5 to 20 hours, which might sound like a lot, but you can spend 300 hours on a painting, you know, depending on how big and how detailed. And I have done that. And I need to take a bunch of my art materials and start burning them up. I have so many canvases and so many paints. I just want to do something that's less realistic and more repetitive, so I can just let it start flowing.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up writing in that, because I think that's also a really accessible thing. So during the episode previous to our conversation here, we were talking about these short short jaunts you can take into creativity, shorter jaunts you can take into following your bliss.
Yeah.
And I think writing is also a really accessible thing, and people can do it. I mean, I've had writing sessions on a piece of paper and a pencil out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
I've had them on my phone, you know, in hammocks, like just being able to type out on the notepad, and like just giving yourself the pleasure of carrying a notebook around or something like that is also super good.
And just getting the ball rolling too, you know, because that can be really unfulfilling.
Yeah.
In the beginning, when you like if you're going to pick up a guitar, right?
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'll switch my guitar to the other side and play it left-handed.
What?
Well, I'm not like learning that, but I'll just do it to remind myself how fucking hard it is to learn guitar,
Oh
you know?
gosh.
So you switch it over and then you go, oh yeah, this is what it was like to be a beginner. This is awful. You know? But it's like just getting through that, getting through putting words together on a page, getting something on a canvas or something. And just, I think it's really important personally to not expect, you know, like what my friend did with his little cartoons.
Right.
They were instantly satisfying to him.
Right.
Some people just have it, but to like, if maybe a person can choose a craft through which they're just gonna like, I'm gonna get good enough at this to express myself.
I had a therapist who was having me use drawing as like an in between, and I ended up doing some self-portraits that I really liked.
Really?
Like I really liked them a lot. They're not good, but I felt like I captured what I was trying to capture in doing.
Yeah, I mean, what does good mean? Are they honest? Are they interesting?
Well, good is my mother was going, that doesn't look like you, and I'm like,
oh
yeah.
This is the inner me.
I'm gonna bite my tongue.
No,
that's great.
It's awesome. I love that he did that. It's like something that I need in my life.
Yeah,
deeply is, and because it's different with writing, you know. And when you do something on a canvas. I knew as soon as I saw his work, I was like, I need to change up my, you know, over time and I need to change my style. It's just, I had that call, you know.
Yeah.
Jealousy is usually a call to action in me. And I saw his work and I was like, kind of felt jealous about it. And I realized I need to do that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I'm glad you got to join me here in the studio.
In the studio.
Studio. I wish you guys could see this because it's actually a closet that I've turned into. You can't see it this way, but it's actually like my desk, and then this is my entryway. This is my front door over here.
It's a hallway and a closet, and the dog was spread eagle in the corner for most of the conversation, like with his legs kicked up in the corner. It's like barking in his dreams.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you're here. Next episode that we've got coming is Brandon Perkins with High Church podcast, which is a very interesting thing, because we were talking about on this podcast, this episode today with Ross, kind of the higher level of consciousness that marijuana can bring to you if you're open to it. I hope to get into some of that today with Brandon Perkins as we interview him later on.
Actually, that brings up another little short part I wanted to call attention to, which is his Ross's experience with Christianity.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I think there's a lot of people out there who bristle at people speaking about their religion, and particularly if that's Christianity. And I understand that. I have the same experience. I am not Christian. I do appreciate the way he talks about it. He sounds like he owns his faith. He's not ashamed about it. And he also links it and humbles, I would say humbles, not humbles himself. That's not a great way to say it, but he pays, he honors that there are other ways. I would think, Ross, I heard him honoring that there are other ways to look at things. You know, when he says like things like, you can call it God, you can call it universe. You don't hear Christians say that very often. Yeah. And I was very grateful for that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought it was good. I've had to do similar in my life, because I've just realized, like, and I learned this actually in AA. It was, I would go to a meeting, and, you know, my whole cultural upbringing around Christianity was, we have the keys to the kingdom. These are it. This is all you got to get into wholeness, to get into the good part of life. And then I'd go to an AA meeting and I'd see people. I'll pick on one person in particular, Tina, this like 65-year-old transvestite who has been an addict their whole life. and it's gone through unimaginable stuff, who would never say they believe in God in a normal circumstance, say, I have found a higher power. I've asked them for help. And then to actually see Tina's life transform with sobriety and transform with healing and transform into newness. Like, that's why I was like, oh, we don't have the monopoly on prayer or asking for help and then getting help. Like, things actually change for the better. And I saw that over and over again in all kinds of different circumstances within the groups of sobriety. And I think Ross was pointing that out too. Like you ask for help, help's going to come. You see the signs and you're ready to see the signs and ready to take action around it. Like,
Yeah.
things move pretty rapidly.
Well, it's like you're saying, we were talking about earlier too, if you, and I don't know this, like, I don't know that I know anything, but I have been experiencing success with this and failure when I don't follow it. But like, if you lean on life, it leans back. You ever fucked with cornstarch and water?
Yeah. It makes that the Newtonian fluids is what they call it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, that always reminds me of what we're talking about, because if you like hit your hand really hard, it's hard, but if you like slowly sink it in, it's soft. And I kind of feel like, you know, that little bit can be a metaphor for all kinds of stuff, but I do feel like there's a little bit, if you lean on life, you know, and trust it more, it will lean back, you know, and support you.
You know, you said that in a men's group. You said that in a men's group a few weeks ago.
Fail at all the time.
You said that in a men's group a few weeks ago, and at the time I was in Costa Rica, but last week in Costa Rica, on one of the best surf beaches in the world that these people come to. These people being real surfers. and I remember, and I would walk every morning from 5 in the morning to like 8 in the morning, just walking on the beach. And I thought about that a lot watching the water, because it's the same thing. Like, you can get in the water and it can blow over you. It can just destroy you, get smashed into the sand. You can duck under it and avoid it, or you can decide to harness it and press against it a little bit with a surfboard or your body or boogie board. And then that thing's going to take you and you're going to like ride that energy. And I thought about that a lot, man. That's like, that is God in the universe, like always there, constantly there. It never goes away. The waves are always going in and out. There's cycles of them just waiting for you, waiting for you to decide, do you want this or not?
And a lot of that, like waiting for you, like to do what, you know, is cutting for sign in my life. It's literally taking, I mean, and again, I'm not a master at this, but it does work for me. Taking a creative mindset toward the things that happen in one's life, and then seeing how, and then you being the force that decides decides how they are, how they affect your life. And I do know that, like, very recently, I've experienced something that's really, really hard, you know, totally my fault, and just like soul crushingly, you know, challenging and sad. And at the same time, you know, as the emotions are going, I still like kind of lay it at some point in time, you know, it's laid out in my like mind on a piece of paper, all of the things that are happening. And then how can these, well, first of all, are these something that are saying something to me that I need to know that will hopefully have them not happen again? And then another way is like, how can I use this to be positive? Those are two different things, but it's legit, man.
Super legit. Dude, thanks for joining me today. I'm glad to see you in person. Thanks everybody for joining us. Cutting for Sign, Ross Pino. See you next time.